I don't know about you, but I was unexpectedly moved by the blessing of each of the children in their individuality, in their beautiful, becoming selves. You are probably familiar with Annie Oakley as a Western folk hero, an American legend, a woman who defied the gender constraints of her time. But you're probably not aware that she almost prevented World War I. She toured with the Buffalo Bills Wild West show for 16 years across the nation and across Europe. And in every one of those shows, she would ask for a volunteer to risk their life by holding a cigarette in their mouth, and she would shoot the ashes off from a distance. Now, every show, no one volunteered except her husband, the sharpshooter, Frank Butler, and he would stand up and she would commence to do that. Well, in 1890, they were performing in Berlin. And at that show, the last German Kaiser and King of Prussia, Friedrich Wilhelm II, who was a great admirer of Annie's, was in the audience. So she did what she normally did, invited someone to risk their lives and to stand up. Well, who should volunteer? But Wilhelm II. What could she do? So he stepped onto the stage, lit a cigar, stood there, and she raised her Colt 45 and blew the ashes right off that cigar. Had she missed, history would have changed, because the Kaiser played a major role in World War I. According to the New York Times, much later, Annie realized her mistake. So after World War I began, she wrote to the Kaiser asking for a second shot. Annie Get Your Gun is a fictionalized account of Annie Oakley's life. It was a 1946 Broadway play, a hit musical with over 1,000 performances. Whether you've seen the show or not, who, by its own admission, after the revision in 1999, is quite dated in many ways. But even if you haven't seen the show, you are definitely familiar with some of the songs, some of whom which you've heard this morning. Doing What Comes Naturally. Everyone knows there's no business like. Right, in my tenor voice, yes. But anyway. And then Anything You Can Do, which you just heard from the choir, which happens to be a favorite of mine. Maybe some of you were here when my predecessor, the former Senior Minister Jim Keck, was in town for an event that we held for him. And he and I sang that back and forth. Anything you can preach, I can preach better. But even before that, at my last church, we used to do a Halloween show, and my co-pastor, who also went by the name of Jim, we sang that to one another. It was a little different twist. I dressed up as in drag as Billy Sunday, the famous preacher, and he dressed up as Amy Simple McPherson. And we sang that duet together. And it was epic, that's all I'm going to say. Especially him as Amy Simple McPherson, because he had this very distinguished or ostentatious handlebar mustache at the time. So that with a wig and a frilly dress was too much to behold. While the musical is interesting in of itself, I'd like to focus for a moment on the real life of Annie Oakley, who was actually born Phoebe Ann Moses in 1860. She had very humble beginnings, came from a poor family. And while her sisters were playing with dolls, she hunted in the woods with her dad. And she would become one of the most famous American women of her time. She had an unparalleled ability to hit a target. In fact, from 30 paces away, she could slice in half playing cards that were held edgewise. She could also turn around, pick up her knife, and in the reflection of her knife, over her shoulder, hit the target. She started at a young age. She shot game, and in fact, later on, when she was just a teen, she would go out and shoot game and sell it to the local grocery stores, and in so doing earned enough money for her mother to pay off the mortgage. Now, you know it's a different time because that mortgage was $200. She outshot the great sharpshooter, Frank Butler, at age of 15, and then a year later she married him. And they were married for the next 50 years, and in fact, they died within 3 weeks of each other. Lakota Sioux leader Chief Sitting Bull considered Annie his adopted daughter. This is in real life, not in the musical. They became close friends, and in fact, he gave her her own Sioux name, which meant Little Sure Shot. On the eve of the Spanish-American War, Annie wrote to President McKinley, hoping he could prevent the war, but should the war be necessary, she offered a regiment of sharpshooting women to fight, 50 of them, she said, at no expense to the government. Her offer was turned down, but she would also make that offer again in World War I. She was a feminist in some ways. She really fought for equal pay for equal work, but she was not a suffragette. Now, she hedged on that a little bit. She thought it was acceptable, quote, if only good women voted. You can understand her sentiment just a little, can't you? She gave her time to the Red Cross and other charitable organizations. And Annie had a quiet dignity, it was said. But most of all, Annie had the courage to become herself. The audacity and tenacity to swim upstream as a woman in a man's world. This journey of self, or to self, that she so remarkably exemplifies. This self-acceptance, this kind of be who you are is, I want to suggest this morning, not just a psychological slogan, but reflects a deep spiritual truth. The image of God is reflected differently in each of us, uniquely expressed in each one of us. You saw that in the children this morning, did you not? The psalmist knew that. He writes of an intimate connection, a divine connection between his body and his soul and his becoming. Oh God, you have searched me and you know me. You formed my innermost parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. This is not a defense in any way of creationism. This is a prayer. This is poetry. This is his expression of his connection with how he understood the divine in that time and in that place. Our rabbi, our teacher Jesus, would say, whoever would save their life must lose their life if they want to find their life. And perhaps that is best understood. Whoever would give up the notions of self, give up expectations of others, roles and people pleasing, will find their life, find who they are, find their self. The journey to self and the journey to God are intertwined. Now, I want to say again, I don't want you to think in any way that I'm reducing this to just be who you are, or I'm born this way. I want you to understand it and reflect on this journey to self as a complex, lifelong journey of becoming our highest self, expressed uniquely as who you are in this world. Because as we accept ourselves, so we accept others. The level to which I believe we accept ourselves is our capacity to accept others. It's our core teaching Love your neighbor as yourself. Are you with me so far? We are shaped by our circumstances, for sure, and our genes, but ask any parent in the room, every kid is different. Am I right? They are who they are, and they come into the world that way. And like the natural world, so full of interesting diversity, we are evolving, expressing the multiplicity of the forms of divine essence in this world. The story is told of Zusha, the great Hasidic master who lay crying on his deathbed, and his students asked him, "Rebbe, why are you so sad? After all the mitzvahs and good deeds you have done, you will surely get a great reward in heaven." "I'm afraid," says Zusha, "because when I get to heaven, I know God's not going to ask me, 'Why weren't you more like Moses?' or 'Why weren't you more like King David?' But I'm afraid that God will ask, 'Zusha, why weren't you more like Zusha?' And then what will I say?" You know, I can relate to Annie Oakley. I was a tomboy. In fact, from about the age of 3 to 8, you couldn't get a cowboy hat or a cowboy boots off me. In fact, the family legend is that on an Easter Sunday morning, I did not want to wear the black patent shoes my mother had bought me to go with my frilly dress, so I hid them. And at the last minute, it would so happen I could only find my cowboy boots to wear to church. I have an older brother and an older sister, and my mother used to say, I used to overhear her saying, I had a girl, a boy, and then one other child. Now, I don't know that that was judgmental. I think it was simply descriptive. So I'm here to say I know a little bit about the journey to self. I know a little bit about that journey's relationship to the divine. I know what it is to be on my knees praying, "Oh God, you search me and you know me. And I am fearfully and wonderfully made." I know what it is to be a woman in ministry who was never supposed to preach. And don't even get me going down the lesbian road. But there was a fire burning in my bones that could not be distinguished by gender conformity, nor by religious conformity. There was a spirit-driven call to become truly and authentically who I was in this world, to best express the divine spirit through me, flawed as I am. You know, this journey of becoming isn't just about the children, or it's about all of us. In fact, this journey to self and journey of becoming, it's about aging too. There's just a couple of us in the room that are aging. The journey of becoming, the journey of discovery of self. We have to do that again and again, do we not? How do I live in this body that doesn't quite work like it did 20 years ago? I was lamenting about this to my hairdresser, who is also like a, spiritual guide. Truly. You know, you don't dare to say anything negative when someone's cutting your hair, so you just listen. I've been going to her for over 20 years, and in fact, I drive all the way to the city just to be with her and have her cut my hair. So I was lamenting that my body just didn't seem like it worked like it used to when she knew me 20 years ago. And with a smile on her face, she said, "Just look at it this way. This, right now, this is as good as you're ever going to look." And I said, that's supposed to be helpful. Great. But it is a journey of becoming. I've discovered who I am as an aging woman, as an aging person. Embracing limitations. This journey to self, this self-discovery is an ongoing journey. Ever mysterious, finding out who we are. Perhaps some of you have read this week about the Sanctuaries team decision to host two individuals, Jose and Kevaline, just so I know how many of you saw that email. For those of you that didn't see this email, there's a caravan of 16 LGBTQI migrants who have set out from across Central America. They call themselves the first trans gay migrant caravan. They have this week come to the border in search of asylum. They're from Honduras and El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua. Seven out of the 10 countries that have the highest murder rates of women are in Central America. Some of the countries I've just named. They are fleeing, as you might imagine, violence and discrimination in their home countries, and the societal issues of poverty and political instability, exacerbated by the physical, psychological, and verbal abuse directed at trans and gay individuals. LGBT immigrants are 15 times more likely than other detainees to be sexually assaulted in confinement. LGBTQI immigrants are detained 90% of the time, despite the well-known risks that they face in detention centers. This group calls themselves the Rainbow 16. They're driven by a desire for life and safety. Somebody said it's not about chasing the American dream. It's not even a political message first and foremost. For them, it's about surviving, about being free to be human beings. I want you to just imagine for a moment the kind of courage it takes these young people to organize themselves. To not only make the trek physically, but emotionally and spiritually. They have turned themselves into ICE, seeking asylum. And should they get it, we would be able to host two of them until they can find permanent housing while their asylum process continues. They are gender nonconformists, kind of like Annie Oakley. They embarked on a journey to self-discovery, self-acceptance. So I hope that you can really hear this. That gender expression is not a moral issue. It may make people socially uncomfortable, but it is not a moral issue. These Rainbow 16, are they not children of God? Do they not express in some way that may be hard for us to understand the image of the divine? You see, we don't have to understand. Jesus did not say, understand one another as I have understood you. He said, love one another as I have loved you. Love meaning to want the highest good. The more we accept ourselves, the more we accept others. So little by little, as you left their voices behind you and the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Because as you save your life, as you and I find our lives and that depth of self-acceptance, that embrace of expressing uniquely the image of God in you and me, then we will embrace that image of God in all God's people. May it be so, and amen.